This is time that we discuss George Eliot. George Eliot is actually the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, and she is originally named Mary Ann Evans. And when she was a girl, she was called Miriam. She was fondly called Miriam. But when she became a writer of novels, she adopted a pen name, and it was George Eliot, a male pen name. She adopted a male pen name, George Eliot. And she was born in Warwickshire. It was in 1819. I told you that Charles Dickens was born in 1812 and Mackpeace Thackeray was born in 1811. And Charlotte Bronte was born in 1816. And her sister Emily Bronte was born in 1818. And the last sister Anne Bronte was born in 1820. And George Eliot was born in 1819. Almost of the same year, she was also born. One among the very important female novelists of the Victorian period. And she is considered one among the very important female novelists of the Victorian period. She was also a journalist, and she worked as an assistant editor of Westminster Review, a magazine. And she was also a translator. And she adopted a male pen name, George Eliot. In fact, she wanted people to take her work seriously, and it was this reason why she wanted people to take her work seriously, so that she adopted a male pen name, George Eliot. And also, she wanted to hide her relationship with a philosopher and a critic named George Henry Lewis. So there was a philosopher and a critic named George Henry Lewis, with whom she lived almost 20 years until his death. She remained with the philosopher and critic George Henry Lewis. Without marrying the man, she remained with him for almost 20 years, and she wanted to hide her name. Therefore, she adopted the pen name George Eliot. Originally, she was Mary Ann Evans, and in her childhood, she was called Marian. She was called Miriam. And her father was a local mill owner, and the same experience can be found in her novel Mill on the Floss. Her father was also the owner of a local mill named Robert Evans. And after attending several schools, she lived with her father near Coventry. And she became a part of an intellectual circle. So there was an intellectual circle who used to visit the house of Anne Mary Evans. And the intellectual circle included Charles Bray, David Strauss, and there were popular philosophers and thinkers of the time visiting her house. And she was directed to free thinking in religious matters. And she also translated, when she was young, she translated the life of Jesus. And it was David Strauss, Dr. David Strauss, who guided her in the translation. And the translation was produced in 1846, Life of Jesus. And even as a student, Anne Eliot, George Eliot, Anne Mary Evans started writing fiction. So in 1857, she published 3 stories, and it appeared in Edinburgh magazine by the Blackwoods. And the stories are not very popular. One is called The Sad Fortunes of the Reverend Amos Barton, and the other is called Miss Gilfield's Love Story. And the third story is called Janet's Repentance. And these 3 stories, not at all very popular, but were produced by her even in her early career. She came out with 3 stories. That was in 1857. And it was at the time she met George Henry Lewis, the philosopher and the critic, and became friends with him and started to live with him, say from 1853 onwards until his death in 1878. Almost for 20 years she stayed with Henry Lewis, George Henry Lewis. And the adult years of George Eliot, she joined for a continental tour with Brace and came into contact with Chapman, and she became assistant editor of Chapman's radical periodical, and she came into friendship with John Chapman. It is not George Chapman, but John Chapman, who was a publisher then. And he was also the editor of the Westminster Review. And her friendship with John Chapman, turned her to become the assistant editor of his magazine Westminster Review, seemingly one of the very important magazines, the Westminster Review. And it was in the Westminster Review, Darwin's book so his essays were published, like Origin of the Species and Survival of the Fittest, challenging religious beliefs. So the conflict between science and religion started with the publication of the book Origin of the Species in 1859. It was in 1859 the book was published. Charles Darwin published his book, The Origin of the Species. It inaugurated the conflict between science and religion. And the book was published serially in the Westminster Review. And it was at the time Mary Ann Vance was working as the assistant editor of the magazine. And her friendship with John Chapman, the publisher, turned her to become the assistant editor of the radical periodical called Westminster Review from 1852 to 1854. She was there. And then next year, so these essays were collected and published. She published the collection of her essays. She started writing essays in the periodical called Westminster Review and collected the essays under the title Scenes of Clerical Life. And this was followed by her popular novel Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, and Sailas Marner, and these are the important novels written by George Eliot. She came out with her novel Adam Bede in 1859, and it was followed by The Mill on the Floss in 1860, and Sailas Marner was produced in 1861. And Adam Bede seems to be her first novel, her debut novel, Adam Bede. So the story takes place in a province called Hayslope. The story takes place in Hayslope. And Adam, the central character, Adam Bede, is a local carpenter. And he had been much admired by his integrity and intelligence. So had been greatly appreciated by the people there. He was a man of great integrity, intelligence, and faithfulness. And at the time he was in love with a lady named Hetty Sorrel, and the love relationship between Adam Bede and Hetty Sorrel. And Adam Bede has a favorite dog also, and it is called Jip, G-Y-P, Jip. And we have to remember the names of the dogs. Especially UGC will be interested in asking questions about the names of dogs. And yesterday I told you, in Jainair we come to find Jain. So in Jainair we come to find that there has been a dog introduced named Skulker. And in Charles Dickens's novel Oliver Twist, Bill Sikes has got a dog named Bull's Eye. And Adam Bede has got a dog named Jip, G-Y-P, Jip. Adam Bede, a local carpenter, much admired by the people there. He was a man of great intelligence and integrity, honesty, and faithfulness. He was a very good man. And he was in love with a lady named Hetty Sorrel. But it was at the same time there arrived a young man named Arthur, the local squire's charming grandson, named Arthur. And when Arthur reached the place, she shifted her love to Arthur. She becomes attracted by Arthur. Arthur, the local squire's charming grandson. And he seduces Hetty also. Arthur seduces Hetty also, and Hetty becomes pregnant. And Adam quarrels with Arthur on knowing about the relation between Arthur and Hetty Sorrel. Adam quarreled with Arthur, and Arthur agreed to give up Hetty, and he left Hazeloop. In fact, to join his militia, he left Hazeloop also. He promised to leave Hetty Sorrel to Adam, and the quarrel was settled. And then Hetty agreed to marry Adam Bede. But at the same time, she comes to discover that she has been pregnant. And she comes to realize that she is pregnant. And in desperation, she leaves Hazeloop in search of Arthur. In search of Arthur, she left Hazeloop. And in fact, her search proved to be fruitless. And she was not able to find Arthur. She wanted and finally delivered a boy. And as she was unable to protect the boy, so she wanted a lot and finally delivered a boy child. A male child was born. And in fact, she was not prepared to protect the child. And she left the child in a field and the child became dead. She went in search of Arthur but could not find him. And after all, she delivered a male child. And in fact, she was not able to protect the child. She left the child in an open field and the child became dead. And Hetty was caught. And she was sentenced to be hanged for the child's murder. For the infanticide, for killing the child, she was ordered to be hanged and was put in the jail. And then her cousin named Dina Morris. Her cousin Dina Morris, who was also a Methodist preacher, she came and stayed with Hetty Sorrel in the prison until the day of execution. And she remained with Hetty Sorrel, educating her, soliciting her, giving her advice that she was a Methodist preacher, Dina Morris. And during the time, Adam Bede also used to visit the jail and came into friendship with Dina Morris, the Methodist preacher. Hetty Sorrel was put in the jail, and in fact, to give her advice and solicitation, a close relative of Hetty Sorrel, a cousin of Hetty Sorrel named Dina Morris, and she seems to be another important character in the novel. Dina Morris reached the jail and stayed with Hetty Sorrel until her end. And her compassion brought Hetty to confess her sins. Hetty was made to confess her sins through the soliciting of Dina Morris. And it was at the time Arthur Denithron, and he was originally named Arthur Denithron. His grandfather was Lord Denithron. And it was at the time Arthur Denithron returned to Hazeloop, that he wanted to attend his grandfather's funeral. When the grandfather was dead, Arthur Denithron returned to Hazeloop, in fact, to attend the funeral of his grandfather. And on reaching Hazeloop, he learned that Hetty Sorrel was in the jail for murdering her child. And after all, he went to visit the jail and requested the authorities to abandon the execution of Hetty Sorrel to reduce the sentence to transportation. and through his involvement, so the punishment of Hetty Sorrel was reduced to transportation, and she was transported to some foreign country. He approached the court, and the death sentence became commuted to transportation. And Adam Bede and Dina Morris. Dina Morris was the Methodist preacher who stayed with Hetty Sorrel in the jail and brought her to confession. And this Dina Morris became a friend of Adam Bede, and they became aware of their mutual love also. They come to understand that they feel equal passion. They get into love, and they decide to marry and live peacefully. And the story of Adam Bede was told to George Eliot. Actually, this story was told to George Eliot by her aunt. It was her aunt named Elizabeth Evans, who was also a Methodist preacher, who told Mary Ann Evans the story of Adam Bede. The story of Adam Bede was told to George Eliot by her aunt named Elizabeth Evans, a Methodist preacher. And actually, Dina Morris in the novel has been modeled on Elizabeth Evans. Elizabeth Evans has been made as the model for Dina Morris in the novel. The novel Adam Bede was the debate novel written by George Eliot. George Eliot came out with her first novel, Adam Bede, in 1859, and on UGC asked the title Adam Bede, by whom the novel was written, George Eliot or Mary Ann Evans. So it was produced in 1859, and the protagonist is Adam Bede. Adam Bede is a local carpenter, and after all, it is the story of his love and his final marriage.